Hey guys, tonight we're embarking on an epic journey, not through time in a comfortable armchair, but across vast, unforgiving landscapes that stretched for thousands of miles. We're talking about the legendary Silk Road, not as a romanticized path of exotic goods, but as a treacherous, grueling nightmare for the brave or foolhardy souls who dared to traverse it, the Silk Road merchants. Imagine yourself leading a caravan through a swirling sandstorm in a desolate desert, or clinging to a narrow mountain pass with a sheer drop below. Your life and your fortune hanging by a thread. Sounds like a tough commute, right? The Silk Road delivered wonders to the world. But here's the cheeky reality check if you were a Silk Road merchant. You probably won't survive this. At least, not with all your limbs, your sanity, or your original camel count. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first challenge as a Silk Road merchant wasn't about haggling prices or securing rare silks. It was simply surviving the planet itself. The very routes you traveled were defined by geographic extremes, deserts, mountains, deadly climates. This wasn't a paved highway. It was a collection of paths winding through some of the most inhospitable environments on Earth, each presenting its own unique set of lethal challenges. Imagine starting your journey from the lush, fertile lands of China. Your path would soon lead you westward into the vast, desolate stretches of the Taklamakan Desert. The name itself, in some interpretations, means go in and you won't come out. This wasn't just a sandy expanse, it was a realm of shifting dunes, searing heat by day and freezing cold by night. Sandstorms, known as Karaburan or black storms, could appear without warning, engulfing your entire caravan in a suffocating, blinding tempest that could last for days. Imagine trying to navigate, breathe, or even stay upright when the very air around you is trying to bury you alive. It's like being caught in a giant blender full of very fine sandpaper. And you're the fruit. If you weren't battling the deserts, you were conquering the mountains. The Silk Road snaked through formidable ranges like the Pamir Mountains, often called the Roof of the World, or the Tian Shan Mountains of Heaven. Here, the air was thin, the passes were narrow and treacherous, and the cold was bone-numbing. You'd face dizzying altitudes, sudden blizzards that could bury your path in feet of snow, and the constant threat of landslides or rockfalls. Imagine leading your heavily laden camels along a precarious cliff edge, one wrong step away from plummeting thousands of feet into an icy abyss. And then there were the deadly climates that shifted with each region, sweltering humidity in river valleys, parching aridity in the steppes, sudden torrential rains that turned dusty paths into impassable quagmires, or flash floods that could sweep away your entire livelihood. The extreme variations in temperature and weather patterns meant you had to be prepared for everything, all the time, or perish. Even the time of year was critical. Traveling through certain regions during the wrong season could be a death sentence. Summer in the deserts meant heat stroke and dehydration. Winter in the mountains meant freezing to death and impassable snowdrifts. Your timing had to be impeccable, a precise dance with nature's most unforgiving moods. One mainstream historical fact that underscores these environmental challenges is the development of specific camel breeds, particularly the Bactrian camel with its two humps, for Silk Road travel. These animals were uniquely adapted to withstand the extreme temperatures and arid conditions of Central Asian deserts and steppes, allowing them to carry heavy loads over vast distances with minimal water. a direct response to the brutal geography. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that merchants traversing the Taklamakan Desert would sometimes rely on the sound of the wind, which supposedly mimicked human voices and ghostly cries, to guide them or perhaps drive them mad across the shifting sands. Imagine trying to find your way through a terrifying desert, and the only sounds you hear are ghostly whispers. It's enough to make you pack it all in and become a farmer. Historians still argue whether the primary challenge of the Silk Road was the sheer vastness and variety of its geographic obstacles, or if the constant threat of human elements like banditry, which we'll get to, was the more significant danger to life and livelihood. Was it the land, or the people on it regardless? Every mile you traveled as a Silk Road merchant was a testament to your endurance against the raw, unyielding power of the natural world, a world that seemed determined to swallow you whole. So, every mile you traveled was a battle against the raw, unyielding power of nature. But as if the earth itself weren't enough, you faced an equally constant and insidious threat from your fellow humans, leading to banditry and raids, constant threat, loss of life, goods. Forget peaceful commerce. Every bend in the road, every isolated pass, every dusk, brought with it the terrifying possibility of ambush, robbery, and outright murder. Imagine the pervasive fear. You wouldn't just be worried about getting lost or running out of water, you'd be constantly scanning the horizon, listening for unusual sounds, assessing every stranger you met. Your caravan, laden with valuable silks, spices, jewels, or ceramics, was a moving treasure chest, a tempting target for anyone desperate or powerful enough to take what you carried. It's like driving a really expensive car through a lawless wasteland, knowing everyone wants what you have, and they're willing to kill for it. Banditry was endemic along large stretches of the Silk Road. Nomadic tribes, dispossessed soldiers, desperate villagers, or organized criminal gangs lurked in strategic locations, narrow mountain passes where you couldn't easily escape, desolate desert stretches where help was far away, or the outskirts of towns where caravans often paused. These weren't always small-time thieves. Some were well-organized groups, sometimes numbering in the dozens, armed and ruthless. The consequences of a raid were dire. If you were lucky, the bandits would simply take your goods, leaving you and your animals alive, albeit destitute. If you were unlucky, you'd face violence, injury, or death. Merchants, their guards, and even their animals could be killed, often brutally. To prevent identification or simply out of cruelty, imagine witnessing your fellow travelers being cut down, or finding yourself fighting for your life, knowing the odds are stacked against you. To combat this, merchants often formed large caravans, traveling in groups of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of camels, often accompanied by armed guards. These guards, however, were an added expense, cutting into profits, and even a large armed escort was no guarantee of safety against a determined band of raiders. Sometimes, you'd even have to pay protection money or tolls to local warlords or powerful nomadic leaders just to pass through their territory. Essentially legalized extortion that added another layer of cost and risk. The sheer unpredictability of these attacks was mentally exhausting. You could go weeks or months without incident, lulling yourself into a false sense of security, only for an ambush to strike when you least expected it. This constant state of vigilance, the nagging fear of losing everything or your life at any moment, was a profound psychological burden. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the severity of this threat is the construction of fortified caravanserai roadside inns at regular intervals along major Silk Road routes. These robust structures, with high walls sturdy gates, and internal courtyards were built specifically to provide safe haven for merchants and their goods overnight, serving as a direct architectural response to the omnipresent danger of banditry. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some legends of the Silk Road speak of desert demons, or sand devils, that would lead travelers astray and eventually to their doom, while clearly folklore. These stories often served as allegories for the very real dangers of getting lost and falling prey to bandits in the desolate expanses. Imagine your worst fears about getting robbed manifesting as actual mythical creatures. It's a vivid way to explain a terrifying reality. Historians still argue whether the primary deterrent to long-distance Silk Road trade was the sheer geographic difficulty, or if the persistent threat of banditry and political instability created a greater economic and personal risk, limiting the volume and frequency of trade more significantly. Was it nature or human nature regardless? Every journey on the Silk Road was a calculated risk, a constant gamble against the very real possibility that your path and your life might be violently cut short. So, every journey was a gamble against both nature and human malice. But even if you evaded the bandits, an unseen, microscopic enemy traveled silently alongside you, bringing us to the terrifying reality of disease and epidemics on sanitary travel, deadly illnesses. Forget modern medicine or even basic hygiene. Life on the Silk Road was a constant exposure to pathogens, turning every cough, every fever, into a potential death sentence far from home. Imagine the conditions. You, your fellow merchants, your guards, and your animals were constantly in close proximity. Sanitation was rudimentary. If it existed at all, waste disposal was often haphazard. Water sources, when found, could be contaminated by previous caravans, animals, or local populations. You would be breathing dust, animal dander, and the stale air of overcrowded caravanserai. It's like being stuck on an unventilated, cross-continental bus, but everyone has the flu, and there are no windows. Ever. The sheer duration of the journeys meant prolonged exposure. A trip across a significant portion of the Silk Road could take months, even years. This extended exposure to varied environments and different populations meant you were constantly encountering new pathogens against which your body had no immunity. Deadly illnesses were a frequent companion. Dysentery, caused by contaminated food and water, would lead to debilitating diarrhea and dehydration, often fatal in remote areas without medical care. Typhus, spread by lice and fleas, would bring high fevers, rashes, and delirium. Malaria was a risk in marshy regions. And then, there was the ultimate terror, the plague. The Silk Road is widely considered a primary vector for the spread of the Black Death, which devastated populations across Eurasia. Imagine seeing your fellow travelers fall ill, developing painful swellings, and dying rapidly, knowing that you too could be next. With no escape and no cure, even common colds or minor infections, which we take for granted today, could turn deadly. A simple cut could become infected and fester, leading to gangrene and amputation, or fatal blood poisoning. There were no antibiotics, no sterile surgical tools, and often, no trained medical professionals along the route. Your body was constantly fighting against unseen microscopic invaders. The very nature of trade, moving goods and people across vast distances, inadvertently facilitated the rapid spread of these diseases. A merchant arriving from one region might carry a disease to a new population, sparking an epidemic. You weren't just trading goods, you were unwittingly trading contagions. One mainstream historical fact that profoundly illustrates this is the role of the Silk Road in the transmission of the Black Death bubonic plague from Central Asia to the Middle East and Europe in the 14th century. The rapid spread of this devastating pandemic along established trade routes is a stark historical testament to the deadly flow of disease alongside luxury goods. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some ancient texts from Silk Road cultures mention elaborate rituals and prayers performed by merchants before long journeys, aimed at warding off evil spirits or curses that were believed to cause illness. Imagine performing a complex dance and chanting before leaving, hoping it protects you from the microscopic bugs you don't even know exist. It's a poignant reminder of their lack of scientific understanding. Historians still argue whether the primary cause of high mortality rates among Silk Road travelers was more often due to acute, fast-acting diseases like dysentery and plague, or if chronic conditions like malnutrition and exhaustion from the arduous journey weakened their immune systems, making them susceptible to otherwise non-fatal illnesses. Was it the bugs or the grind regardless? Every breath you took, every sip of water, and every interaction on the Silk Road was a silent gamble against invisible killers, making disease a constant, terrifying companion on your quest for riches. So, disease was a constant, terrifying companion. But even if you somehow evaded the invisible killers, a more fundamental, visceral threat often haunted your journey: scarcity of water and food oasis dependence. Starvation risk. Forget convenient rest stops or overflowing buffets. Life on the Silk Road meant a perpetual, desperate search for life-sustaining sustenance, turning every oasis into a beacon of hope and every dry, barren stretch into a potential grave. Imagine the gnawing pangs of thirst. In the vast deserts, water was the most precious commodity, far more valuable than gold or silk. Oases, fertile spots fed by underground springs, were literal lifelines, dictating the very routes of the Silk Road. Your entire itinerary would revolve around reaching the next known water source before your supplies ran out. Imagine the agony of a parched throat, your lips cracked and bleeding, knowing that if the next oasis was dry, or if you simply missed it, your journey and your life would end. It's like playing a real-life game of connect the dots. But if you miss a dot, you die. Your camels, incredibly resilient as they were, also had their limits. While they could go days without water, extended stretches between oases pushed even them to their breaking point. Losing a camel meant losing your precious cargo capacity, or even your ride to safety. Food was equally scarce. You'd carry provisions like dried fruits, nuts, grains, and cured meats, but these were heavy and limited. Fresh food was a luxury only available at the rare, fertile oases or settled towns. Days, sometimes weeks, would pass without fresh produce, leading to vitamin deficiencies and general weakness. Scurvy, a painful and debilitating disease caused by lack of vitamin C, was a very real threat on extended journeys. The risk of starvation was ever present. If your caravan was delayed by a sandstorm, a mountain pass blocked by snow, a bandit raid, or simply a navigational error, your carefully calculated supplies could quickly dwindle to nothing. You might face the horrific choice of abandoning valuable goods to save your animals, or worse, abandoning a struggling companion to preserve what little food and water remained for the rest of the group. Imagine looking at your last handful of dates, knowing that's all that stands between you and utter desolation. The psychological toll of this constant scarcity was immense. Every sip of water was savored, every morsel of food carefully rationed. The fear of hunger and thirst was a relentless companion, driving your decisions and preying on your mind. You learned to live on the absolute minimum, your body perpetually in a state of energy conservation. One mainstream historical fact that underscores this reliance on oases is the proliferation of ancient oasis cities along the Silk Road, such as Dunhuang, Turpan, and Samarkand. These settlements didn't just grow organically. They thrived precisely because they were vital watering and resting points for caravans, providing essential sustenance and security in otherwise desolate regions. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some ancient travelers' guides or local lore along the Silk Road mentioned singing sands in certain desert regions, whose strange, booming sounds were sometimes attributed to guardian spirits of hidden water sources, or terrifying omens of impending doom. Imagine hearing the desert itself hum or roar, and wondering if it's a sign of salvation or starvation. It's a surreal, desperate hope. Historians still argue whether the extreme scarcity of water and food primarily shaped the routes and pace of Silk Road travel, making it inherently slow and dangerous, or if the development of sophisticated camel husbandry and desert navigation techniques largely mitigated these environmental risks, allowing for more consistent trade. Was it a constant terror or a manageable challenge regardless? Every step you took on the Silk Road was a testament to your desperate need for sustenance, transforming the simple act of finding food and water into a daily, life-or-death quest. So, finding food and water was a daily, desperate quest, but even when you reached a bustling caravanserai or a vibrant market, you faced another profound challenge that often felt as treacherous as any desert or mountain pass: language barriers and trust communication challenges. Betrayal. Forget universal translators or common courtesy. The Silk Road was a dizzying tapestry of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of different languages and cultures, where miscommunication was rife and betrayal a constant. Lurking danger. Imagine arriving in a new city. After weeks or months of solitary travel, you're ready to trade your precious silks from China for a fortune in Roman gold coins, but the local merchant speaks Sogdian, or Persian, or Turkic, or Chinese, and you, perhaps, only speak a dialect of Aramaic. How do you negotiate prices, discuss quality, arrange for transport? You'd rely on a complex network of gestures, a few widely recognized trade terms, or, most precariously, on interpreters. It's like trying to close a multi-million-dollar deal using only charades and Google Translate from 2005. The sheer number of languages meant that finding a reliable interpreter was crucial. These individuals, often polyglots who traveled with caravans or settled in trade hubs, were your lifeline, but their honesty was paramount. An unscrupulous interpreter could deliberately mistranslate, inflate prices, or collude with local merchants to cheat you, and you'd be none the wiser until it was too late. Imagine relying on someone who holds all the keys to your financial success, but you can't verify a single word they say. This pervasive language barrier meant that trust was a fragile, hard-won commodity. Building relationships with distant trade partners took years, relying on reputation, personal connections, and the word of others. A single act of betrayal could ruin your standing, your fortune, and your ability to trade, beyond spoken words. Cultural nuances played a huge role. A gesture that meant agreement in one culture might be an insult in another. Bargaining styles differed wildly. Some cultures expected aggressive haggling, while others viewed it as disrespectful. Misunderstandings could lead to stalled deals, offended parties, or even violent confrontations. Imagine accidentally insulting a powerful warlord because you used the wrong hand gesture. It's a very fast way to end up in a very deep ditch. The lack of effective communication also made it difficult to gather reliable intelligence about conditions further along the route. News of bandit activity, political changes, or outbreaks of disease traveled slowly and imperfectly. You were often operating in a fog of incomplete information, relying on fragmented reports filtered through multiple linguistic layers. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the linguistic diversity and the role of interpreters is the prominence of Sogdian merchants as key intermediaries along the Central Silk Road. Speaking an East Iranian language, Sogdians became expert polyglots and cultural bridges, facilitating trade between various empires and nomadic groups, highlighting the critical need for linguistic mediation. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some merchants reportedly developed their own simplified forms of pidgin languages, mixtures of various regional tongues, to facilitate basic communication for trade, though these would still be highly rudimentary and prone to misinterpretation. Imagine communicating complex business deals through a very rough form of me Tarzan, you Jane speak. It certainly adds a layer of complexity. Historians still argue whether the linguistic and cultural barriers along the Silk Road primarily hindered large-scale, continuous trade, limiting it to high-value, low-volume goods, or if the sheer economic incentives and the rise of professional interpreters largely overcame these challenges, allowing for a surprisingly robust flow of goods and ideas. Was it a crippling obstacle, or just another solvable problem? Regardless, every deal you attempted, every conversation you held on the Silk Road was a linguistic tightrope walk, where a single misspoken word or misjudged gesture could spell financial ruin or even personal danger. So, every deal was a linguistic tightrope walk, with potential ruin lurking in every misstep. But even if you masterfully navigated the myriad languages and built precarious trust, your meticulously planned journey could be instantly derailed by the ever-present specter of political instability war. Shifting borders, new rulers. Forget predictable nations and stable governance. The Silk Road passed through a dynamic, often violent, geopolitical landscape where empires rose and fell, and the very concept of territory could change hands with startling speed. Imagine preparing for a journey. You've secured your goods, hired your guards, and planned your route, but then news trickles in. A nomadic chieftain has launched a successful raid and now controls a key mountain pass. Or two powerful empires have just declared war, cutting off a crucial trade artery. Suddenly, your entire plan is worthless. You might have to find a new, longer, and more dangerous route. Pay exorbitant new tolls, or abandon your journey entirely, facing financial ruin. It's like trying to run a global shipping company, but the entire world map keeps changing every Tuesday, and nobody tells you until you're already halfway there. The Silk Road didn't exist in a political vacuum. It traversed the territories of numerous empires, kingdoms, and nomadic confederations, the Han and Tang dynasties in China, the Parthian and Sasanian empires in Persia, the Roman and Byzantine empires, the Kushan Empire, and later, the vast Mongol Empire. Each of these entities had their own laws, their own taxes and their own interests. Their rise and fall, their alliances and conflicts, directly impacted the safety and viability of the trade routes. War was the ultimate disruptor. A conflict between two major powers could halt trade entirely, making vast sections of the Silk Road impassable due to active battle zones, conscription of local populations, or the destruction of infrastructure. Even skirmishes could create dangerous pockets of instability, turning previously safe routes into death traps. Imagine arriving at a bustling city, only to find it deserted or under siege. Shifting borders meant that territories you once paid tribute to might suddenly be controlled by a new, unknown ruler with different demands, new taxes, new tariffs, or even outright confiscation of goods could occur without warning. You had to constantly adapt to the whims of whoever held power along your path, essentially paying protection money to a rotating cast of warlords. The constant change also meant that intelligence was vital, knowing which routes were currently safe, which rulers were friendly to merchants, and where new dangers lay was critical for survival. But information traveled slowly, often by the same dangerous routes as your goods, meaning you were frequently reacting to events that had already unfolded weeks or months ago. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this political instability is the rise and fall of the various nomadic empires, such as the Xiongnu, Gokturks, and later the Mongols, who periodically controlled vast stretches of the Central Asian steppes. Their periods of ascendancy often facilitated safe trade like the Pax Mongolica, but their internegrin conflicts or conflicts with settled empires frequently disrupted and endangered the Silk Road for prolonged periods. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some merchants reportedly carried multiple sets of official seals or even different types of currency to quickly adapt to whichever new temporary authority controlled a particular region, showing their desperate attempts to navigate the fluid political landscape. Imagine needing a different passport for every 50 miles you travel, and none of them are ever quite valid. It's a very practical, if unsettling, form of adaptability. Historians still argue whether the Silk Road's long-term existence was primarily due to the inherent economic demand for luxury goods, allowing it to persist despite constant political disruptions, or if periods of powerful, centralized empires like the Mongols were absolutely essential for its flourishing, with trade almost ceasing during fragmented periods. Was it demand-driven or peace-dependent regardless? Every mile you traveled as a Silk Road merchant was a tightrope walk across a perpetually shifting political landscape, where the stability of your journey was always just one battle, one coup, or one new ruler away from complete collapse. So, your journey was a political tightrope walk, constantly threatened by shifting powers. But while you, the merchant, faced existential dangers, let's not forget the silent, often suffering partners in your enterprise: animal hardship camels, horses, beasts of burden. Forget comfortable stables or veterinary care. The animals that carried your precious cargo endured unspeakable toil, pain, and death, their survival inextricably linked to your own, and often sacrificed for it. Imagine your beasts of burden. Most likely, you relied on camels, particularly the two-humped Bactrian camel, renowned for its endurance. These magnificent animals were living freight trains, capable of carrying hundreds of pounds of goods for days without water across deserts and mountains. But their resilience had limits. Their humps, while famous for storing fat, could shrink from lack of food. Their feet, while padded, could be cut and bruised by rocky terrain. They would plod along, day after day, through searing heat and freezing cold, their bodies pushed to their breaking point. It's like asking a marathon runner to carry a refrigerator on their back for months. Without proper shoes or even a water bottle, horses were also used, particularly in the steppe regions, for faster travel or by guards, but they were generally less suited for the extreme conditions of the deep desert or high mountains than camels. Donkeys and mules might be used on shorter, more mountainous sections. Each animal had its vulnerabilities, its breaking point. The conditions these animals endured were horrific by modern standards. They were routinely overloaded, forced to march for endless hours, sometimes without sufficient rest. Fodder and water were often scarce, especially in the most desolate stretches. Mirroring your own struggle for sustenance, you would have to carefully manage their rations, often prioritizing the most valuable animals, or those carrying the most valuable goods. Injury was common. A stumble on a rocky path could mean a broken leg, rendering an animal useless. Disease, much like for humans, could spread quickly through a caravan, wiping out entire strings of beasts. And when an animal fell ill or was too exhausted to continue, the decision was brutal: leave it behind to die. Or, in desperate circumstances, slaughter it for its meat and hide. A painful necessity that meant losing a valuable asset. Imagine the sickening sound of a valuable animal collapsing, knowing its journey, and part of your fortune just ended. The bond between a merchant and their animals was complex. They were property, essential tools for trade, but also living beings whose suffering you witnessed daily. Your success, indeed your survival, depended entirely on their endurance. Their silent struggle was a constant backdrop to your journey, a grim reminder of the price of progress. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the sheer scale of animal use and their critical role is the archaeological discovery of vast amounts of camel dung and animal bones at ancient caravanserai sites along the Silk Road. These findings attest to the immense numbers of animals that passed through these routes and the significant impact their presence had on the environment and the daily life of the merchants. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some ancient Chinese accounts of Silk Road travel mention merchants tying bells to their camels, not just to announce their presence, but also because the constant jingling was believed to ward off evil spirits and keep the animals from panicking in the desolate, eerie stretches of the desert. Imagine the only sound you hear for days on end is the monotonous, metallic ringing of dozens of camel bells, hoping it scares away invisible demons. It's a strange comfort in a desolate land. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rate of animals on the Silk Road was primarily due to the inherent severity of the climate and terrain, or if it was exacerbated by inadequate animal husbandry practices and the sheer economic pressure to push them beyond their limits. Was it the environment, or the exploitation regardless? The long, arduous journey of a Silk Road merchant was mirrored by the silent, relentless suffering of the beasts of burden beneath their heavy loads, their every step a testament to the brutal demands of ancient commerce. So, the long journey of trade was mirrored by the silent, relentless suffering of your animal companions. But while they carried the physical burden, you, the merchant, carried a different kind of weight, leading to isolation and loneliness weeks away. Mental strain. Forget quick phone calls or video chats with loved ones. Your life on the Silk Road meant extended periods of profound solitude, separated by vast distances from everything familiar, leading to immense psychological challenges. Imagine the endless days and nights on the road. You'd be surrounded by your caravan members, of course. But true intimacy and connection were rare amidst the constant dangers and stresses. For weeks, sometimes months, you would see nothing but the same faces, the same landscape, and the same relentless horizon. News from home was virtually non-existent. You wouldn't know if your family was well, if your children were growing, or if your business was thriving in your absence. It's like being on a perpetual, silent, and incredibly stressful space mission, but without the cool spaceship or the mission control. The sheer isolation could be crushing. You were disconnected from your community, your traditions, and the comforting routines of settled life. This prolonged detachment could lead to deep feelings of loneliness, especially during long stretches of monotonous travel through empty deserts or silent mountains. The mind, without constant stimulation or familiar anchors, could begin to play tricks. This mental strain was exacerbated by the constant anxieties of the journey, the fear of bandits, the worry about dwindling supplies, the stress of navigating treacherous terrain, and the ever-present threat of disease. Sleep was often restless, filled with vigilance. There was little opportunity for genuine relaxation or emotional release. Imagine carrying all these worries, day after day, with no one to truly confide in, and no easy way to alleviate the stress. You were essentially your own therapist, and, frankly, you weren't doing a great job. For some, the loneliness could manifest as deep melancholia or even madness. The vast, empty landscapes, the eerie silence broken only by the wind or the creaking of saddles, the shimmering mirages in the desert, all could contribute to a sense of unreality and disorientation. Ancient accounts often speak of the psychological toll of the desert, where travelers might hear phantom voices or see ghostly figures, even when you reached a caravanserai. The interactions were often transactional, bargaining, securing supplies, preparing for the next leg, true companionship, the kind that sustains the spirit, was a luxury rarely afforded to the long-distance merchant. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the sheer duration and isolation of these journeys is the average travel time for goods from Xi'an, China to Antioch, Syria, which could take approximately 1 year or more for a round trip. Excluding layovers, this extended absence from home underscores the immense personal sacrifice and profound isolation faced by merchants. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some Silk Road cultures had specific superstitions about whistling in certain desert areas, believing it would summon malevolent spirits or attract dangerous sandstorms, adding another layer of silent anxiety to the already quiet and isolating journey. Imagine being out in the middle of nowhere, desperate to make some noise, but fearing that a simple whistle could bring doom. It's a very lonely kind of self-censorship. Historians still argue whether the psychological toll of isolation and mental strain primarily led to increased instances of mental illness or desertion among merchants, or if the strong communal bonds formed within the caravan largely mitigated these individual psychological challenges. Was it a solitary suffering, or a shared burden regardless? The vast, silent stretches of the Silk Road were not just physical barriers, they were profound psychological tests, pushing the limits of your endurance against the gnawing emptiness of profound solitude. So, the vast, silent stretches of the Silk Road were profound psychological tests, pushing the limits of your endurance against profound solitude. But when you finally reached a bustling market or a major trade hub, you didn't just face different languages. You faced entirely new ways of life, leading to cultural clashes, customs, laws, misunderstandings. Forget a universally understood code of conduct. Every stop along the Silk Road brought you into contact with societies that had vastly different norms, legal systems, and social etiquettes, where a simple misstep could have severe, even deadly, consequences. Imagine stepping off your camel into a new city, say, Samarkand or Kashgar. The clothing, the architecture, the smells, the sounds, everything is alien. You're not just a foreigner, you're a potential interloper in a society with deeply ingrained traditions. What's considered polite in your homeland might be an egregious insult here. What's a minor infraction for you might be a capital crime for them. It's like arriving at a party where everyone is playing a game with unwritten rules, and you're the only one who doesn't know them. But the stakes are incredibly high. Customs varied wildly. Hospitality rituals, dining etiquette, religious practices, even body language, all could be radically different. For instance, how do you greet a local dignitary? What kind of gift is appropriate? Is it rude to look someone directly in the eye? Or rude not to, a faux pas could lead to strained negotiations, loss of face, or even accusations of disrespect. Imagine trying to explain that you didn't mean to offend the local chieftain by accidentally pointing your foot at him during a negotiation. A gesture that in some cultures is deeply insulting. It's a very quick way to turn a profitable business trip into a very unprofitable prison stay. Laws were equally diverse and often opaque to outsiders. You couldn't assume that the legal protections or commercial regulations you knew from home would apply. Different regions had different systems of justice, different punishments for theft, fraud, or violence. You might find yourself subject to Sharia law, or the laws of a nomadic Khanate, or the regulations of a Chinese imperial outpost. What if a local official decides your goods are contraband, or demands an excessive tax? Your recourse would be minimal, and your understanding of the legal process even less. Misunderstandings were pervasive, not just linguistic ones. Religious differences could lead to suspicion or outright hostility. Perceptions of honesty, fairness, and business ethics could vary. You might inadvertently violate a sacred space, offend a deity, or engage in a practice considered taboo, simply because you didn't know. The burden was always on you, the traveler, to adapt and to avoid offense. This constant need to navigate unfamiliar social landscapes, to be perpetually aware of potential cultural pitfalls, added an enormous layer of stress to an already arduous journey. You were not just a merchant, you were a diplomat, a cultural anthropologist, and a legal scholar, all rolled into one, and often a very clumsy one. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the need to adapt to diverse customs is the existence of multilingual signs and prayer areas within larger caravanserai, catering to the varied religious and cultural backgrounds of the merchants. This demonstrates a practical, if sometimes superficial, accommodation of diverse customs in major trade hubs. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some merchants adopted local hairstyles, clothing, or even minor religious observances of the regions they frequented, not necessarily out of true conversion, but as a pragmatic way to blend in, build trust, and avoid cultural friction. Imagine having to totally change your look every few months just to make a sale. It's an exhausting fashion cycle. Historians still argue whether the numerous cultural clashes along the Silk Road primarily hindered long-term intercultural understanding and cooperation, leading to distrust and sporadic violence, or if the economic incentives of trade largely forced a pragmatic tolerance and exchange of ideas that eventually enriched all involved societies. Did it create conflict or foster connection? Regardless, every major stop on your Silk Road journey was a dive into an alien world of customs and laws, forcing you to constantly reevaluate your behavior and navigate a labyrinth of unwritten rules, hoping not to inadvertently seal your own fate. So, every stop on your Silk Road journey was a dive into an alien world of customs and laws, forcing you to constantly navigate a labyrinth of unwritten rules. But even when you thought you had mastered the social landscape, another threat, equally insidious, often targeted your most prized possession, your goods, leading to fraud and deception counterfeits. Swindlers, bad deals. Forget honest transactions and transparent markets. The Silk Road was a breeding ground for trickery, where unscrupulous individuals sought to exploit your vulnerability at every turn. Imagine sitting down to make a major deal. You've brought genuine Chinese silk, rare spices, or precious jade. But your potential buyer might try to pass off counterfeit coins as legitimate currency, or swap out a bale of your valuable silk for one of lesser quality when you're not looking. You had to be constantly vigilant, examining every coin, every thread, every gem with intense scrutiny. It's like trying to buy a house in a foreign country where everyone is secretly a con artist, and you're doing all the paperwork by hand. Without a lawyer, counterfeits were a major problem. Spices could be adulterated with cheaper, less potent ingredients, or even dangerous fillers. Precious metals could be alloyed with baser ones. Ceramics could be cleverly replicated. The artistry of deception was as refined as the artistry of the goods themselves. Imagine discovering, after weeks of travel, that the gold you just purchased is actually mostly copper, or that your saffron is just dyed onion skins. Your profit margin, and indeed your entire venture, could vanish in an instant. Swindlers were everywhere. They might pose as reliable guides who would lead you astray into bandit territory, or as honest merchants offering too-good-to-be-true deals on worthless goods. Some would play elaborate long cons, gaining your trust over days or weeks before vanishing with your money or merchandise. You had to develop an almost paranoid distrust of strangers, constantly second-guessing motives and verifying every claim. Bad deals were a common outcome even without outright fraud. Unfavorable exchange rates between different currencies, inflated prices for vital supplies at remote outposts, or simply being out-negotiated by a more experienced or ruthless local merchant could severely cut into your profits. Information asymmetry was a merchant's worst enemy. The local vendor almost always knew more about the market, the true value of their goods, and your desperation than you did. The consequences of falling victim to fraud could be catastrophic. You could lose your entire investment, be left with worthless goods, or even accumulate crippling debt that would prevent future journeys. Your reputation as an honest, shrewd merchant would be shattered, making it impossible to conduct further business. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the prevalence of deception is the archaeological discovery of numerous counterfeit coins along Silk Road routes. These finds, from various empires and periods, demonstrate the widespread practice of currency debasement and forgery, which directly impacted the trust and value of transactions for merchants. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some merchants reportedly employed testers, or sniffers, for valuable commodities like spices or perfumes. Individuals with highly developed senses of smell or taste who could detect adulteration and ensure the quality of goods, essentially acting as ancient, human quality control machines. Imagine hiring someone just to smell your peppercorns to make sure they're real. It's a testament to the sophistication of fraud, and the lengths people went to avoid it. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of fraud and deception primarily limited the volume of trade to goods that were easily verifiable, like raw silk, or if the development of sophisticated merchant networks and reputation systems largely mitigated these risks, allowing for complex transactions to occur despite the inherent challenges. Did it cripple trust, or just force ingenuity regardless? Every transaction you made on the Silk Road was a high-stakes gamble, where your vigilance and shrewdness were the only shields against the pervasive threat of being outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and utterly fleeced. So, every transaction on the Silk Road was a high-stakes gamble against being fleeced. But you weren't entirely alone in this treacherous world. You were part of a larger unit, navigating these dangers within a complex caravan organization hierarchy, rules, internal conflicts. Forget a simple group of friends traveling together. A Silk Road caravan was a meticulously structured, often tension-filled mini-society, with strict roles, shared responsibilities, and its own brand of internal politics that could make or break the journey. Imagine the caravan you were part of. At its head would be the caravan leader, often the most experienced and respected merchant, or a professional guide. This individual held immense authority. They dictated the pace of travel, made decisions about routes, negotiated with local authorities, and managed interactions with potentially hostile groups. Their judgment could mean the difference between life and death, profit or ruin. It's like being on a very long, very dangerous road trip. And your designated driver is also the CEO, the security chief, and the ultimate arbiter of all disputes, below the leader. There was a clear hierarchy. You, as a merchant, would be responsible for your own goods and animals, but you'd be expected to defer to the caravan leader. There would be professional guards, often hired for their fighting prowess, responsible for security. Animal handlers, cameleers, or charvadars meticulously cared for the beasts of burden. Servants and other assistants filled various roles, from cooking to setting up camp. The rules of the caravan were unwritten but strictly adhered to. Everyone had a specific duty, and cooperation was essential for survival. Breaking ranks, hoarding resources, or failing to pull your weight could endanger the entire group, and such transgressions would be met with swift, informal justice, often administered by the caravan leader. Imagine being exiled to the vast, empty desert by your own group for not sharing water. That's a powerful incentive to follow the rules, despite the necessity for cohesion. Internal conflicts were inevitable. Long journeys, constant stress, physical discomfort, and the sheer proximity of diverse personalities often led to disputes. Arguments over water rationing, suspicion of theft, disagreements about route choices, or clashes arising from cultural differences could erupt. A shrewd caravan leader would mediate these conflicts, but sometimes they could escalate, threatening the unity and safety of the entire group. Imagine trying to manage a dozen strong-willed, heavily armed people, all exhausted and paranoid, in the middle of nowhere. It's a miracle anything got done. The very success of the journey often depended not just on external factors like weather or bandits, but on the ability of the caravan members to work together despite their individual anxieties and grievances. The caravan was a microcosm of society, reflecting all its complexities, but amplified by the extreme conditions of the Silk Road. One mainstream historical fact that highlights this organization is the specialized role of the caravan-bashi caravan master in Central Asian and Persian traditions, who was explicitly responsible for the logistics, safety, and conduct of the entire caravan, often owning the camels and leading the expedition. This formalized position underscores the importance of strong, centralized leadership for these perilous journeys. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some larger caravans would sometimes include professional storytellers, musicians, or even religious scholars, whose role was to entertain the members, boost morale, and help diffuse internal tensions during long, monotonous stretches of travel. Imagine needing a stand-up comedian just to keep everyone from murdering each other after weeks in the desert. It's a very human way to cope with extreme stress. Historians still argue whether the strict internal hierarchy and rules of Silk Road caravans primarily ensured their efficiency and survival in harsh conditions, or if the frequent internal conflicts and power struggles sometimes destabilized them from within, leading to more losses than external threats. Was it a well-oiled machine, or a powder keg regardless? Every mile you traveled on the Silk Road was a lesson in shared endurance, where your survival depended not just on your own grit, but on the fragile, complex dynamics of the moving mini-society that was your caravan. So, your survival depended on the fragile, complex dynamics of your caravan, a moving mini-society. But when the day was done and you sought respite, your accommodations offered little comfort or safety, leading to rough accommodations caravanserai, dangerous sleep. Forget soft beds and secure rooms, your nights on the Silk Road were spent in basic, often crowded, and sometimes perilous roadside inns or makeshift camps, where true rest was often elusive. Imagine the end of a grueling day's travel. You're exhausted, dusty, and perhaps aching from the saddle or the sun. Your destination for the night would likely be a caravanserai. These were fortified roadside inns, typically square or rectangular, with high walls, a single large gate, and an open central courtyard. Around the courtyard were small, often unfurnished rooms or alcoves, communal stables for animals, and perhaps a well. It's like a very basic, very dusty medieval motel, but the rooms are just empty stone boxes, and the lobby is filled with 100 camels. These structures, while providing essential protection from bandits and the elements, were far from luxurious. Your room would be a simple space, sometimes just a raised platform, where you'd unroll your meager bedding directly onto the hard ground. Privacy was a luxury, and you'd be sleeping in close proximity to other merchants, guards, and their animals. With all the accompanying smells and sounds, imagine trying to get a good night's sleep with the incessant chewing of dozens of camels just outside your door, and the snores of countless tired travelers echoing around you. But even the caravanserai could be places of dangerous sleep. While the walls offered security against large-scale raids, smaller threats lingered. Petty thieves could infiltrate, attempting to pilfer goods from unwatched bales or even from your pockets as you slept. Disputes between weary travelers could erupt into violence, and hygiene, as we've discussed, was poor, meaning even a night's rest could expose you to disease-carrying insects or contaminated air. You might find yourself taking shifts with your guards, or even fellow merchants, to ensure your precious cargo remained safe through the night. If a caravanserai wasn't available, you would make a makeshift camp in the open desert or mountains. This meant even less comfort and greater vulnerability. You'd build a small fire for warmth and cooking, huddled together for protection, and post vigilant guards to watch for threats, both human and animal, sleeping under the vast, star-filled sky might sound romantic, but not when you're constantly listening for the approaching thud of hooves or the rustle of a predator in the darkness. The quality of rest you got was critical for your endurance the next day, but true, deep, undisturbed sleep was a rare commodity. Your body and mind were constantly on alert, even when attempting to rest, preventing full recovery from the day's stresses. One mainstream historical fact that underscores the importance and basic nature of these accommodations is the archaeological remains of numerous caravanserai structures across Central Asia, Persia, and the Middle East. Their standardized, functional design, focused on security and basic shelter rather than comfort, directly reflects the primary needs of Silk Road travelers for centuries. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some caravanserai, particularly those near major trade cities, would sometimes have designated areas for specific types of goods or specific groups of merchants, leading to informal districts within the courtyard. Imagine a medieval mall food court, but for dusty travelers and their camels. And everyone is trying to sell each other spices. It speaks to the organizational, if not luxurious, nature of these hubs. Historians still argue whether the presence of caravanserai primarily mitigated the dangers of the Silk Road by providing essential safe havens, or if their often basic and crowded conditions actually contributed to the spread of disease and internal tensions, making them points of vulnerability as much as safety. Were they havens, or hotbeds regardless? Your nights on the Silk Road were a continuation of your daily struggle, a restless period of vigilance and rough accommodations, where even sleep offered little true escape from the omnipresent threats of the road. So, your nights on the Silk Road were a continuation of your daily struggle, a restless period of vigilance even in the supposed safety of a caravanserai. But beyond human threats and environmental extremes, the wild, untamed landscapes held another, primal danger, bringing us to dangerous wildlife predators, venomous creatures. Forget safe nature preserves. The vast, untamed regions of the Silk Road were home to fierce animals, poisonous insects, and venomous reptiles, adding another terrifying layer of risk to your already perilous journey. Imagine the constant awareness of your surroundings as you traversed deserts, steppes, and mountains. You weren't just worried about bandits or the lack of water. You were alert for the telltale signs of a nearby predator: wolves, lynx, and even bears in the more mountainous and forested regions roamed these wild expanses. A hungry wolf pack could target your weary camels or donkeys, or even pose a direct threat to your unarmed caravan members. Especially at night. It's like camping in a national park. But there are no rangers, and the bears are definitely looking at you as dinner. Then there were the venomous creatures. Scorpions lurked under rocks and in the crevices of your gear, their stings excruciatingly painful and potentially fatal, especially in remote areas far from any help. Venomous snakes, camouflaged against the dusty ground, were a constant danger, particularly when setting up camp or foraging for firewood. Imagine reaching for a piece of wood and realizing your hand is inches from a coiled viper. One bite could mean agonizing pain, paralysis, or a slow, agonizing death, with no antidote in sight. Even seemingly innocuous creatures could pose a threat. Large spiders, centipedes, and various biting insects could cause painful reactions, infection, or simply make life miserable, disrupting much-needed rest. Swarms of biting flies in certain regions could torment both humans and animals, potentially spreading disease. Protecting your animals from these threats was crucial. A camel bitten by a venomous snake or attacked by a wolf could mean losing your cargo capacity, or even leaving you stranded in the wilderness. You'd have to keep vigilant watches at night, build protective enclosures for your animals, and be armed not just against humans, but against the raw, untamed wilderness itself. This constant awareness of dangerous wildlife added another layer of mental stress to your journey. You were not just fighting the elements and fellow humans, you were also constantly contending with the unpredictable dangers of the natural world. A world where you were often seen as just another source of food or a territorial intruder. One mainstream historical fact that underscores the presence of large predators is the historical accounts and archaeological evidence of hunting practices along the Silk Road, where travelers and nomadic peoples frequently encountered and hunted wild animals for food and protection, including large carnivores that would have posed a threat to caravans. The very existence of hunting spears and bows among travelers' gear points to this reality. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some local superstitions along certain desert stretches of the Silk Road spoke of giant, monstrous worms or beetles that could burrow through sand and attack passing caravans. A fantastical embodiment of the very real fear of hidden dangers beneath the surface. Imagine hearing tales of enormous, terrifying sandworms that could swallow your camel whole. It's a very vivid, if wildly exaggerated, way to express a primal fear. Historians still argue whether the threat from dangerous wildlife primarily constituted a significant cause of mortality and loss for Silk Road merchants, or if their organized caravan structures and experienced guards largely mitigated these risks, making them a less frequent concern than human dangers like banditry. Was it a constant fear, or a rare occurrence regardless? Every rustle in the bushes, every shadow in the fading light, and every scuttling sound on the ground reminded you that on the Silk Road, you were never truly alone, and the wild world around you could be as deadly as any human foe. So, every rustle and shadow reminded you that the wild world itself was a deadly foe, and amidst all these very real dangers, the deep-seated anxieties of the journey often manifested in another pervasive way, bringing us to superstitions and fears, omens, spirits, desert demons, forget cold, hard logic. Your life on the Silk Road was often permeated by ancient beliefs, unsettling folklore, and primal terrors, adding a heavy psychological burden to your already perilous travels. Imagine the eerie silence of the vast desert night, or the echoing stillness of a high mountain pass. Your mind, exhausted by constant vigilance and deprivation, would often turn to the unknown. Strange rock formations might be seen as petrified giants. Unusual wind patterns might be interpreted as whispers from malevolent spirits, and the shimmering mirages of the desert could easily morph into beckoning ghosts. It's like being in a never-ending horror movie where the special effects are just your own tired brain. And there's no director to yell cut. Omens were everywhere. The flight of birds, the sudden appearance of an animal, a particularly vivid dream, or even a seemingly random event could be interpreted as a sign of good fortune or, more often, impending doom. Merchants, desperate for any indication of what lay ahead, would scrutinize these signs, often delaying journeys or altering routes based on what they perceived as divine warnings or curses. Imagine canceling a major trade deal because a raven flew overhead 3 times, or because your camel sneezed strangely. It sounds ridiculous now, but to them, it could be a matter of life or death. The Silk Road, crossing myriad cultures and beliefs, was a melting pot of spirits and desert demons. Chinese folklore spoke of malevolent fox spirits or mountain sprites. Central Asian traditions warned of peri-fairies or jinn, sometimes benevolent, sometimes malevolent or terrifying desert-dwelling ghouls. Persian legends warned of powerful divs. Each culture contributed its own pantheon of unseen forces, all potentially influencing your journey. You'd hear tales of caravans vanishing without a trace, blamed not on bandits or thirst, but on unseen entities that lured travelers to their doom. Imagine telling ghost stories around a flickering campfire in the middle of nowhere, and realizing those stories might actually be true. These superstitions weren't just idle tales. They shaped behavior. You might carry specific amulets, perform rituals before embarking, offer sacrifices at sacred sites, or recite prayers from your own faith, hoping to appease angry gods or ward off evil. You'd be wary of whistling in certain desolate areas, as we mentioned, or building fires on certain days, fearing it might attract unwanted attention. The fear of these unseen forces added a profound psychological weight. Beyond the physical dangers, you were battling a spiritual landscape, where every unexplained sound or shadow could be a harbinger of supernatural peril. This belief system, while offering a framework for understanding the inexplicable, also deepened the terror of the unknown. One mainstream historical fact that supports the prevalence of such beliefs is the archaeological discovery of numerous small altars, religious artifacts, and votive offerings at ancient Silk Road waypoints and mountain passes. These indicate that merchants and travelers routinely sought spiritual protection and made offerings to various deities or spirits for a safe journey. Reflecting their deep-seated fears and superstitions, a particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some merchants reportedly consulted professional dream interpreters or seers at major caravanserai before difficult legs of their journey, seeking guidance or warnings from their subconscious or the supernatural realm. Imagine going to a dream doctor to find out if your business trip will be successful. It's a very human attempt to gain control in an uncontrollable world. Historians still argue whether these widespread superstitions and fears primarily served as psychological coping mechanisms, allowing merchants to process and externalize the very real dangers they faced. Or if they sometimes led to irrational decisions and unnecessary delays, hindering the efficiency of trade. Did they offer comfort? Or just create more problems regardless? Your mind on the Silk Road was not just a navigation tool. It was a battleground for ancient fears and chilling superstitions, making every unexplained event a potential omen of supernatural doom. So, your mind on the Silk Road was a battleground for ancient fears and chilling superstitions. Adding a psychological layer to your grueling physical journey, finally, after weeks, months, or even years, you'd complete a leg of your journey. But even the return journey's home at last. But dangers remain. Forget immediate, blissful rest, getting back to your point of origin, or even just the next major trade hub, presented its own unique set of challenges and lingering perils. Making true security elusive until your cargo was sold and your feet were firmly planted back on truly familiar ground, imagine the mixed emotions. As you approached your destination, whether it was your true home or just the next big market, a surge of relief would wash over you. You'd survived the deserts, the mountains, the bandits, and the diseases. The thought of a warm bed, a proper meal, and perhaps seeing your family or trusted colleagues again would be intoxicating. It's like finishing a marathon, but then realizing you have to run another, slightly different marathon just to get to the starting line of your next life. However, the dangers remained. The route you took back was often the same treacherous path you just endured. Bandits knew that caravans returning from a successful trade venture would likely be laden with valuable coin or new goods, making them even more tempting targets. You might encounter the very same hazards: a sudden sandstorm, a blocked pass, a new outbreak of disease that you narrowly avoided on your outward journey. The vigilance couldn't drop until you were truly safe, even if you arrived safely. The work wasn't over. You had to successfully sell your acquired goods, often navigating further rounds of negotiation, cultural understanding, and the ever-present threat of fraud or a bad deal. The profit wasn't yours until the transaction was complete and the payment secured. Imagine making it all the way back across the continent, only to find the market has crashed, or your buyer has vanished. The physical toll of the journey would linger. Your body would be ravaged by exhaustion, dehydration, and potentially lingering illnesses. Recovering from weeks or months of hardship would take time, and for many, the cumulative stress would have long-term health consequences. You might carry scars, chronic aches, or the subtle signs of malnutrition. Psychologically, the transition back to normal life could also be difficult. After experiencing such extreme conditions and forging deep, often brutal, bonds with your fellow travelers, the mundane routines of settled life might feel alien or unsatisfying. You would carry the memories of the journey, the sights, the sounds, the close calls, and the profound isolation, shaping your perspective forever. One mainstream historical fact that underscores the continuous peril of return journeys is the historical record of Roman laws that specifically address the risks to merchants on their return from Eastern trade routes, including provisions for insurance or legal protections against losses from piracy or banditry. This highlights that the dangers were not only outbound but persisted throughout the entire commercial cycle. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some merchants, after completing a particularly harrowing journey, would perform elaborate Thanksgiving rituals at their local temples or shrines upon their return, offering a portion of their profits in gratitude for their survival, rather than simply for their success. Imagine celebrating not just that you made money, but that you didn't die trying. It's a very practical and poignant form of religious observance. Historians still argue whether the cumulative physical and psychological tolls of these continuous, dangerous return journeys primarily led to merchants taking fewer trips, thus limiting overall trade volume, or if the immense potential profits simply outweighed these risks for a dedicated class of professional traders. Did the dangers make them quit, or just push them harder? Regardless, reaching your destination on the Silk Road was never the end of the story. Every triumphant arrival was merely the signal for another potential departure, another dangerous gamble, with true safety and peace often remaining just beyond the horizon. Now, let the swirling sands of the desert settle, the icy mountain winds fade, and the distant cries of the caravan leader gently fall silent. The dust of the long journey is brushed from your clothes. The ache in your muscles softens, and the nagging anxieties of bandits and disease melt away. There's no more desperate search for water, no more haggling with suspicious strangers, no more fear of hidden dangers lurking in the shadows. Just the soft hum of your fan, the gentle warmth of your blanket, and the quiet comfort of your room. You can release the imagined burdens of that horrifying Silk Road life, the constant peril, the profound solitude, and the endless struggle for survival. That demanding, dangerous, yet incredibly vital ancient trade route belongs to history, not to your peaceful present. Drift now into a deep, untroubled rest. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.